Hello, my friends and fellow travelers. My name is Pierce. This is my channel, Tales from the Road. Thanks so much for stopping by. Because you clicked on this video today, we're obviously going to talk about the popular, delightful, super interesting country of Colombia. This is a great country with great spirit, with really great vibes, but it's a little complicated to get around, and it definitely has some travel concerns. So in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know before you go to Colombia. If that sounds good, let's get it. Vamos! As we always do with these videos, let's start with a little historical and geographical information so we can get to know Colombia a little bit better. Geographically speaking, Colombia can be found on the northern part of South America, bordered by Panama to its north, Venezuela to its east, Peru, Brazil, and Ecuador to its south. Colombia, not unlike their modern neighbors, have a very colorful history, which starts with indigenous cultures and finishes with Spanish colonial rule and then independence. First off, for thousands of years, Colombia's indigenous communities created advanced societies with a rich culture, tucked away in Colombia's tough terrain, mostly tropical jungle and mountain valleys. In the early 1500s, Spanish explorers colonized the northern part of the Caribbean coast of Colombia, establishing their first colonies, Santa Marta and Cartagena. For the nearly 300 years of Spanish colonial presence in Colombia, the Caribbean coast and their cities became super important economic areas in the entire New World. Not unlike many of their Spanish colonial neighbors, the call for independence of Colombia came at the start of the 1800s, led by Simón de Bolívar, who I kind of like to think of as the South American George Washington. Bolívar and his allies' independence movement was able to topple Spanish control in the region, in which Bolívar established a new state, Gran Colombia, which included Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. This is also why many of the countries in that region have the exact same flag. As for modern-day Colombia today, the country is notable for some very beautiful things and some very bad things as well. In the 1980s, Colombia really hit the international news hard as it was the home of narco trafficking from South America, and that became a big part of their identity on the international market ever since, especially since the Netflix TV show Narcos came out. Everybody watched it. Everybody learned the story of Pablo Escobar, and that became a big chunk of what people know about Colombia. I will say that modern Colombia today is much more than this sort of stereotypical narco state, and there's so much beautiful culture, art, music to be found in the country, as well as some of the most amazing food you'll find anywhere in the world. That being said, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Colombia, so let's get into it. So let's start with visas. For Americans, you can go to Colombia for 90 days visa-free. That means if you're going for a vacation, you're good to go, buy your ticket to Bogota, and fly in there. Not a problem. One question I get from people a lot is when you travel to Colombia, do you need a yellow fever vaccine? The Colombian government does state that you need a yellow fever vaccine to enter Colombia. The question is, are they actually going to verify that you have it to let you in the country? I always say it's better to be safe than sorry. Apparently, if you fly from countries where yellow fever is present, like in Brazil, typically they will ask you on the border. Although flying from the US, because there is no yellow fever in the United States, you typically won't be asked if you have the vaccine before you enter. If you, for whatever reason, need the yellow fever vaccine when you're in Colombia, you can actually get it very cheap. I actually got it in Colombia and it was $25 in comparison to somehow $200 to $400 in the United States. So that's also a good deal if you want to get an extra vaccine on the cheap. Of course, please, on this fact, do your own research. Don't take this video as, no, you don't need the yellow fever vaccine if you're flying from the US. I'm not saying that. Money. In Colombia, they use the Colombian peso, and the Colombian peso trades right now between 4,000 to 4,300 to $1 US. The inflation rate is high, so of course the prices, like when you see them on restaurant menus and everything, is going to be quite large. It's always good to travel with some sort of calculator app to make sure that you're paying the right amount of money, because when the exchange rate gets quite wide, sometimes people can overcharge you and you don't realize. Is Colombia cheap? I would say Colombia is a very fair price for most things. When I went a couple years ago, Colombia was really fair for food. You could eat a pretty significant portion of food. You could get drinks, all for a very fair price that's certainly not going to break the bank. Typical lunches would be around $5, $6, maybe even less if you're in a more local place. You can definitely go out for beers that are $2, $3. Certainly not going to break the bank. As far as hotels, there are many hotels, Airbnbs that you can find in many of the major cities, Bogota, Medellin, Cartagena, that certainly aren't super expensive. I think the most expensive place that I went to in Colombia was Cartagena, more because it's a tourism destination on the beach, and I think all beach cities generally are just more expensive. Medellin was actually a really good price. I didn't think it was that expensive, and especially if you wanted to get an Airbnb for a month and like stay there as a digital nomad, great destination for that, really good deals. You can look anywhere between $500 and $1,000 for the month. I've heard some cheaper. I've heard you can get something super excellent for a little bit over $1,000 a month. So if that's what you're looking for in one of the major cities of Colombia, they definitely do exist. Before I get into the next topic about Colombia, I want to tell you about the sponsor of this video, SimLocal, a company that sells eSIM cards that will keep you connected to family and friends while you're on your travels. As a person who travels a lot and lives abroad as a digital nomad, I can say that getting a SIM card in a new country is an absolute hassle. I can remember going to the Greek island of Crete and spending almost a full day trying to get a SIM card in my phone. You've got to check different plans, you've got to get the physical SIM, you've got to show an ID, you've got to go with all of these weird timings that they have in different countries. Sometimes the middle of the day they're closed, sometimes it's a hassle. And sometimes they don't even speak English. So this is where SimLocal can come in. SimLocal specializes in easy to set up eSIMs, and an eSIM is basically a SIM card that you don't need to physically put into your phone. It's really easy to activate and set up. It eliminates the need for physical SIM card swapping. It gives you immediate access to local networks, maps, and apps seamlessly, and it reduces the hassle in managing multiple SIM cards on a trip. SimLocal's eSIM facilitates easy connectivity abroad, giving you instant access to local networks right when you show up, and avoids the high cost of roaming charges if you're trying to travel with the SIM card you have from home. SimLocal also works reliably with many local networks and top providers in each country that you may be going to. They have a very high customer satisfaction rating and 5 stars on Google, Trustpilot, and TripAdvisor, as well as a very good refund policy. If you're interested in using a SimLocal eSIM on your next trip, but you're unsure if your device will be compatible, they have a list of brands and devices on their website, which you can find in the link in the description below. Don't forget to use my discount code TAILS10 at checkout for 10% off your next eSIM purchase. I want to thank SimLocal once again for sponsoring this video. They're a really cool company. Make sure to check them out. And now that we know how to travel connected, let's talk more about Colombia. Transportation. Getting to Colombia from the US is a bit far, and you're probably going to have to end up flying from the east coast of the United States, like Miami or Atlanta, because we do often forget that South America is actually quite east of the United States. So if you're flying from Los Angeles, that could actually be a pretty long flight. That being said, you're probably going to fly into Bogota International Airport, which is the biggest airport in the country. It's, of course, in the capital city, and it's one of the hub airports of all of South America. So if you're flying to a secondary city like Medellin or Cartagena or Cali, you may fly to Bogota. You also may be routed through Panama, which I think is the major hub between the United States and South America. So Panama or Bogota is where you're going to end up flying. And then from there, you can take a smaller domestic flight or a smaller international flight. When you get into Colombia, traveling between the major cities is actually a bit challenging because they're always going to require a flight unless you are totally game for very long bus rides. The flights, however, are not terribly expensive. Colombia has their own airline company called Avianca, and Avianca has pretty fair flights. There's also a couple other budget airlines that you can take, but I think I was paying around $80 to $100 going between Medellin to Bogota, and I think another $80 to $100 to fly from Bogota to Cartagena. So while it's a little bit expensive for travel between the two, I don't think it's going to break the bank. Of course, flight prices change, so be aware that that could be the case. But if you're planning on taking buses in Colombia, buses are incredibly challenging because Colombia is a very mountainous region that's very disconnected with very bad roads through these mountainous regions. So if you want to take a bus from Medellin to Bogota, it could take 10 hours, it could take 13 hours, it could take 15 hours. It may not look that far on a map, but don't believe the distance, believe the roads. And people know the roads are not good. I had a friend who was taking a bus and there was a landslide and the bus took 26 hours or something. So I would just avoid that and take the flight, even if it's a little bit more expensive than you were expecting. Transportation in the cities is all about common sense. Number one, walking in major cities in Colombia is just not a good idea, specifically after dark. The reality about Colombia is the security is not fantastic. So what I always do and what I recommend is download a taxi app. Colombia has a couple different ones, and always order an Uber or order some sort of shared taxi. That's the way that you're going to want to travel. I wouldn't really recommend walking around too much outside of any tourist centers just because you really do have a target on your back if you really don't look like you know what you're doing in that certain location. Also, and it goes with many South American countries, never take a taxi off the street. Please always use an app, or if your hotel orders it for you, because they of course know the taxis that you should be getting into. Some of these countries have fake taxis. Please don't take a taxi off the street. It can be very dangerous. Let's transition that into security. Is Colombia dangerous? I think the short answer is a bit, and the long answer is yes. So when you're there, I think most people, when they travel, are going to have a fine experience. When I was in Colombia, did it feel safe? Not really. But did anything happen? No. I think as a traveler, we need to make certain decisions about how we go from A to B, where we find ourselves, where we feel comfortable being. And a lot of that comes with common sense or like street smarts. So Colombia is all about common sense and street smarts. The cities are not super walkable, so I wouldn't worry about walking around. But I think walking around, especially like if you don't know exactly where you're going, and especially if you don't have a phone or a map, like it's just dumb. You're just asking for issues. There's sections of Bogota, especially the downtown. There's sections of Medellin. There's sections, if not the whole city of Cali. There's definitely sections of Cartagena that are there. They feel dangerous. I'm not going to lie to you. There are, of course, sections that feel less dangerous. Like I think the old town of Cartagena is really nice. I think there's definitely pockets in Bogota that are really beautiful. You got to keep your head on a swivel. That's how I'd say. This is sort of the same feeling you have in Mexico. Definitely the same feeling you have in Brazil is when you're traveling, just make sure you don't carry that much cash with you. If you have your phone, keep it in your pocket. Don't walk around with your phone. If you have a camera, don't keep it around your neck. These are just some simple things because in Colombia, a lot of people are on motorbikes and people often get robbed by people on motorbikes in Colombia. So I'm not here to tell you that Colombia is super dangerous and you shouldn't go. It's just like this is a destination where if you're going to go, you need to travel smart. You need to do the research. You need to make sure that you can do whatever you can to not stick out. And if you ask locals, they also do this every day as well. So you don't have locals who are just wandering around at 2 a.m. through the streets of Medellin, which is not happening. A lot of people, they take precautions, they take Ubers, they don't walk at night, they don't carry a ton of cash with them, they carry fake wallets with them sometimes. It's just the reality of the situation. So don't want to scare you, but definitely there's a lot of articles online. Make sure you take the proper precautions before you go to Colombia. I can give you a mini anecdote because I did something sort of stupid in Colombia one time, and this happens to even the most seasoned travelers. Basically, I walked to the bus station. It was a little bit sketchy, but not too sketchy. I was going to buy a ticket for the next day for my girlfriend and myself to go on a day trip, and I took an Uber back. There was really bad traffic in Medellin that day, so the Uber driver wanted to divert and go a different route. I was like, okay, that's fine. The Uber driver ends up taking me through, basically, there's an area called Trinidad in Medellin, which is a super big hotspot for cartel violence and where a lot of drugs are sold out of there. And this dude just drove me right through. It was one of the sketchiest things I've ever seen, and I actually felt incredibly, incredibly unsafe during this whole process, even though the taxi driver was just driving me through. I'm sure no one would have done anything, but realistically, he drove me into a cartel hotspot. Which was not good. Basically, at the end of the cartel hotspots, they have a guy on the street with some sort of gun who's watching to see who comes in and out of the neighborhood. The taxi driver flags him in, and then I realize I'm in a very dangerous situation. So I was luckily wearing a hoodie. I put my hoodie up. I was trying to sort of lay low key in the back of the car. Luckily nothing happened. I just think that's the stuff that if you can control this, I would say really tell them no, we're gonna have to sit in traffic. I'm happy to pay more and waste my time because I think saving that 30 minutes put myself in a very dangerous position, and there wasn't really anything I could do once I was already in it. If you don't speak Spanish, it's even worse. So maybe you should learn to speak a little bit of Spanish before you go to Colombia, or travel with a little translator app or maybe a little translation book. Always helpful. I don't think the taxi driver was trying to do anything dangerous or make me feel uncomfortable. I think for him, that's just the city he lives in, and that's the reality of being a taxi driver for people in Colombia. That's just the reality of life there. So for me, I'm just very happy nothing happened. I certainly went home, and I was sort of really aware of what just happened. It doesn't sound that dangerous, but it actually could have been awful. So my point is, it's just this is a reality in Colombia. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, of course, but just protect yourself when you go to countries like this. It doesn't mean you're going to have a bad time. I had a completely fine time in Colombia. There's just the total air of anything could go wrong at any time, and maybe that's what makes Colombia interesting for some people, you know? Live life on the edge a little. Next, there's a couple things I just want to say about Colombia that are super fantastic, and then we can move on to the food section. Colombia has really great music and spirit. Everywhere I went in Colombia, people were playing salsa, cumbia, bachata, the various sounds of Colombia. It's a musical people who love to dance and be out and drink beers and enjoy the nice weather, and people are very friendly. If you speak Spanish, people often stop you, ask you questions. They're very friendly, chill people, and just like a pleasure to be around. So I always want to shout out the musical friendliness of Colombians, as well as their passion for things in their own society, like the passion for soccer. I went to a soccer game in Colombia. It was one of the coolest things I did. Super dangerous feeling, but also super like epic energy and really, really fun. Mixed in with the music and the whole vibe. It's like a really good experience. And then also the nightlife in Colombia, the dancing, the clubs, the bars, they're all really lovely. They're also, everything comes with a bit of sketchiness in Colombia, but I just love the spirit of this place. It really goes with the people who are also great. It's also a great place to speak Spanish because if you want to improve your Spanish, I feel like they don't speak terribly fast and they speak pretty clearly without these crazy accent markers that you would find in Spain or in Argentina. So it's a good middle ground. And so for me, I had a lot of success in my conversations in Spanish. And it really made me feel very comfortable in the country. So now on to food. And I love Colombian food so much. This country has so much to offer in terms of flavor, in terms of spices, and in terms of absolute gut-busting savage food. So here are a couple of my favorites. I think Colombian arepas, which are basically corn cakes that are typically stuffed with cheese or with meat or with beans, are super great. They're like the central street food of Colombia. You can find little ladies like making the arepas all over the place. They have a plancha. They're popping them down. They're hot. They're fresh. They top them with a spicy sauce. It's like so good, so addicting, and the perfect way to start your morning. One of the most legendary food dishes in Colombia is the bandeja paisa, or the country tray, something like that. This is just a mix of everything that's just like 25,000 calories and just the best thing that you'll ever order anywhere. Beans and rice, you've got some ground beef, you've got some chicharrones, you've got some fried plantains, you've got some sausage, you got eggs, all on one plate. It's so good. It's a specialty of Medellin in particular. And it's fried, it's fatty, it's salty, it's spicy, it's just like, it's everything that I love on one plate. It's so bad for you, but it's so good for the soul. And that's what's important. Colombia is also a really cool place to try interesting fruits, fruit juices, and smoothies. Colombia is known for, of course, having a large chunk of the Amazon rainforest in it, and out of there, they're pulling all these very interesting fruits and vegetables, a lot of which I've personally never seen before. So if you have the chance when you're sitting at a cafe in Colombia, make sure to grab a little something sweet and tasty. Colombians are also notably fans of soups, some of the most famous being sancocho and ajiaco. Both chicken soups, but very different. Ajiaco comes from Bogota originally and is always served with avocado. Sancocho you can find all over Latin America in general, and each country has their own different variety. If you want to drink like a Colombian late night, you must try aguardiente, which is basically an anise-flavored hard alcohol. They have one that's pretty sweet, one that's not so sweet, and it's a perfect pairing with any Colombian beer in the hot atmosphere that is the majority of the Colombian climate. Very Colombian. To finish the video, I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the places that I visited during my 5 weeks in Colombia. To start off, let's talk about the capital city, Bogota. Bogota is a really cool city with a lot of spirit. And it's important to know that the altitude of Bogota is pretty high. If you fly in from somewhere pretty low sea level, you could actually experience altitude sickness, so prepare for that. The center of old Bogota is very beautiful. There's a plaza with old churches, good museums, and very great Spanish colonial style architecture. They also have a really nice area of old buildings called Candelaria. It's very beautiful. You can find the Botero Museum. Botero is Colombia's most famous artist. He's very famous for painting these sort of fat people, or normal characters, but sort of fat and circular. It's very interesting and very endearing. So you can also go to the Museo del Oro, which is the gold museum, where you can see a massive collection of really interesting indigenous artifacts that are made out of gold. Very, very cool. Would definitely recommend it. Bogota in general is not my favorite city. The traffic is really, really bad, so getting around isn't that easy. And actually the city center itself, like the sort of the modern city center and extending into the general center, pretty sketchy at night. So if you're staying in Bogota, I wouldn't necessarily recommend staying in the city center itself. There are many good neighborhoods on the northern side of Bogota that are safer at night, more comfortable, better to walk around, where a lot of the, I guess, middle class to wealthier Colombians live. The city center itself, while having a lot of things to do, definitely changes when the sun goes down. So something to note. Also, the weather in Bogota is very interesting because it's in South America, you'd expect it to be nice and sunny and hot. But Bogota actually year-round is around 70, 75 degrees, normally cloudy, rainy, and a bit windy. So that's also something to plan for if you're planning on going to Bogota and Cartagena, because Cartagena is obviously tropical, very hot. Bogota, not tropical, not very hot. So it's an interesting place to start. Next up, we've got Medellin. Medellin, the city of Pablo Escobar and all of the narco stuff, notably, is a really cool city that's blown up on the digital nomad circuit in the last 10 to 15 years. Medellin itself is more of a vibe city. They call it the city of permanent spring because the weather there is always good, and it's really like a city where you can sort of enjoy the little pockets of really good cafes and bars and restaurants, spend your money comfortably, go out for a night out in their very lively downtown area. But just as with Bogota, Medellin also definitely has some sketchy areas to it. The old city center I found really sketchy. I really didn't enjoy whatever they consider the downtown of Medellin. I wouldn't go there. A lot of people who do the digital nomad life end up spending most of their time in El Poblado, which is this sort of new high-rise, new money area of Medellin with a lot of foreigners. It's nice. I just wouldn't say in Medellin there's necessarily anything specifically to do there that's like that you couldn't find in any other part of Colombia. That being said, Medellin does have some interesting tourist opportunities. One, of course, being exploring Colonia 13, which is basically a favela that they've opened up for tourism that has a great access to sort of the rap music culture, dance music culture, and the new urban modern culture of Colombia. They do a lot of tours there, although typically the favelas in and around Medellin are notoriously dangerous. This one is less dangerous, but it is still a favela with a definite gang presence, and it was actually a site of a sort of civil war scene not too long ago where the government of Colombia actually stormed in there because it's very hard to get these gangs out of there. So anyways, if you want to do that or you want to do a Pablo Escobar tour, you certainly can. I'm not sure the Pablo Escobar stuff is the most ethical tourism, to be honest. I really don't want to support the guy. But even in Medellin, there is a very big, he's a really great figure, and then a lot of people think he's a terrible guy because what he did was just awful in many regards. So, you can do what you want with that. They do have a lot of cool tourism opportunities, but what I like about Medellin is it's in Antioquia, and Antioquia itself is a very beautiful region of Colombia with a lot of, for example, coffee farms, which you can go visit, which are called fincas. And they also are very close to the lake region. So one day I went to an area called Guatape, which is a beautiful lake region with a very large mountainous rock that you can climb to the top of, and you can get such an epic view of the nature of Colombia. You can, of course, go to many family-run coffee fincas where they'll give you a tour. You can try the coffee. You can buy some of the best coffee in the world and learn how it's made. Very, very cool. I would definitely recommend that for anybody doing that. And there's another city in this sort of finca region called Jardín, which may have been the highlight of my time in Colombia. Very small Spanish colonial little city center in the mountains, very traditional people, little really nice restaurants, really cute little guest houses, really good day trips, and not sketchy at all, like a very different vibe than the rest, than the major cities of Colombia. As it goes, I think the large cities in South America often have a lot of the biggest problems in South America. So when you get out of the large cities, I think everything calms down a little bit. So I can see spending your time in Jardín, by Guatape, in Antioquia, going around, seeing the various little cities that are out there. I think that could be a lovely trip, and it wouldn't be terribly dangerous in any sort of way. So the other major city that sometimes people visit is Cali. I haven't been there, and honestly, I haven't heard the best things about that city with regards to safety. So I skipped it. The last place I went is to the north, being Cartagena and Santa Marta. These are beautiful cities, specifically because of the Spanish colonial presence, what they built, the city walls, the old streets with the beautiful buildings, the vibrant life going on there. There's really good restaurants. There's a lot of new money. I really liked both of these cities. They have good beaches if you're interested in beach travel. It's tropical. It's nice out. There's a lot of good stuff going on there. I did find Cartagena very touristy. Santa Marta is a little bit less touristy because it's a just a smaller city in general. But again, outside of the sort of city walls of Cartagena, I found the city really not nice. It's not a place that I felt very comfortable at all. So I spent the majority of my time inside the city walls in Cartagena. I tried to walk around. There's a couple other secondary neighborhoods that you can see, but I didn't really like it. So I thought Cartagena was also the most expensive place in Colombia that I personally went to. They have really good bars and restaurants. It definitely has a bit of a Panama City vibe if you've ever been to Panama City. So I think long story short on the coastal stuff, there's really pretty things to see. The price point is higher and the security is not any necessarily better. As a final note for this video, I will say that Colombia is a fantastic country with so much to see. Great culture, good weather, amazing food, really cool, nice people. But the negatives are reasonably big for certain tourists. So if you want a super safe, super comfy, easy trip, I'm not sure Colombia is the one for you. I think if you're used to going to Mexico and all of the things that involve travel in Mexico, I think Colombia isn't particularly that different. I didn't find it much worse than, for example, Peru or Brazil. I thought they were all sort of in the same box when it comes to visiting major cities. I love the Colombian countryside and the exploration you can do and the just pure beauty of the land that you can find there. The jungle, the hills, the Caribbean coast, the Pacific coast. There's so much to see in Colombia. I certainly didn't even scratch the surface on my 5 weeks there. And it's a country I would love to come back to for a lot of different reasons. That being said, if you have any questions about Colombia, I do private travel consulting, or you can just drop a comment down below and I will get back to you. Happy travels, my friends, and I will see you in the next one.